Good evening. This is Hope Preston, and this is the Washington County Master Gardener Association monthly meeting. Our presentation tonight is The Wonderful World of Plants We Can Grow, presented by Sean Hogan. Sean is the principal designer, author, and his nursery is the Cistus Design Nursery on Sauvie Island. And Sean specializes in public and private garden design, as well as planning and public space planting design. He's an avid plant hunter and collector, and he is specializing in the introduction of new and appropriate plants to Western North America, especially our area that has summer dry climates. So I'm very interested to hear what Sean has to offer for us, and plan on writing down a lot of plant names as we are going through this. So Sean, just to add, if questions come up as Sean is going through his presentation, please type them into the Q&A down at the bottom of your screen. And at the end of the session, when Sean is done, we'll go through the questions and answer any that you have. So Sean, I turn it over to you now.
Oh, thank you very much. Great to be here. I've got a studio audience here of about 50 people. Just kidding. All alone. Well, thanks for having me. It's funny when we have a title like The Plants We Can Grow, and we only have 7 hours for this presentation. Had to narrow it down just a little bit. So I gathered some things that I particularly like and have been playing with this year. And it's a little bit of a trip around the world. Mostly Western things, and then a few things that I think are undergrown that we should have a lot more of around us. Hard to narrow that down also. But we'll start here, Earth on a clear day. Let's see. See if I can get it to share here. Not advancing for me.
There you go.
There it is. Sorry about that. We'll see if it keeps doing this for me. Really, when we're looking at our own gardens, it's a funny thing. Easier to look at somebody else's, at least it is for me. But any concept, whether it's my own garden or um, planning we're doing for somewhere else, this happened to be for a project in Southern California, it really is fun to take a moment in the sort of the day of your life and the day of the life of your garden and think, all right, what's this spot going to be like? What's it going to be like now? What's it going to be like in 5 years? That kind of thing. And when will I have to get my chainsaw out the first time? So that kind of a patch of ground. This is a project when actually only a couple of years after went in Portland, using a lot of, as you can see here, manzanitas and things like that. There's a deciduous crepe myrtle in the background, but it really is fun to take these sort of seasonal plants and work with them. The same project here, kind of a transition between native. You can see some different Oregon grapes there, and just a little bit more lush next to the house. Got a variegated fatsia. We never have too many of them because we have to do these by cuttings, and they're kind of big, chunky things. So we never have a bunch, but they're certainly nice to have one here and there. This is one that we named Spilt Milk a number of years ago. And then the plant in the background that I really love for its texture is Metapanax Delavay. It's sort of one of those Schefflera Aurelia relatives. It can grow into a small tree of about 15 feet, easily kept as a shrub also. But the Metapanax are great. They're evergreen, really fine texture. It looks like a cross between bamboo and a Japanese maple, maybe a little marijuana thrown in there somewhere, but very graceful. And really, for all purposes, a little bit like having an evergreen Japanese maple, part sun to mostly shade. The house I showed just a few minutes ago, here it is in midsummer. Uh, I think everything I do grows into a jungle, but here you can see lots of the manzanitas and all of that, and the crepe myrtle in full flower. So I really like the different textures of broadleaf evergreens. And we'll start here with a few things that I have just really been in love with the last couple of years. These are called Mahonia eurobracteata, and they're uh, around now. There's one called Soft Caress that I do really like. but this is one we've been working on that has particularly pewter leaves. And it's always difficult when I tend to like silvers and blues and things like that in the sunny garden. Then we go around to the shade, and it's difficult to come up with those hues. This is one that will do that. It'll grow in mostly sun to almost full shade. Kind of a typical Asian Mahonia in that it has a nice rosette of leaves. So they really read well from a distance. Say, I don't know where most of your views are, but um, sometimes I find myself in the garden flipping something in an obscure corner and think, wow, it looks great from here. But then I realize nobody will be there ever except me in 2 years when I'm pruning again. So I'm sort of thinking, all right, what does the visitor see? And for instance, what are my best views out of the house? And usually it's when I'm doing dishes, that kind of thing. So this is a really great thing to see on the outside. Gets maybe 3 feet tall. Flowering at this time of the year, they started in October. It'll go into November or so. And then later on in the winter, it has really nice sort of inky blue to purple fruit. So really good for all year round. And the hummingbirds really seem to like these. Just some obscure things that we seem to be able to do really well with. There's a whole category that people are getting into called tropical blueberries. And these are usually growing in trees, often in the South Pacific, high elevation. This is one called from the Himalayas called Agapetes smithii. Um, Makes a great hanging basket plant. Actually, we've had a really good time with this in the ground, semi-shaded position, but it's never gotten frost damage. So those flowers are each about an inch long or something like that. This is a plant that does need some summer water, but I think that's just a radical thing. And some natives here, I've been so much into more and more Western natives of late just because of the low care they need, and they make us look like us. Um, some of the things like Garrias, I think they've gotten kind of a bad rap over the years. A few types of coast silk tassel, Garrya elliptica. They do grow on the coast from about Tillamook south to Southern California, but a lot of them get black spot. So I love the texture of them, but sometimes I say it's a really good thing to give your neighbor as a housewarming. So you can look at its texture, but only from about 50 feet away or something like that. But there are, and we're coming up with a lot more forms that do not get leaf spot. And this one we named Road Warrior. It has tassels that are 6, 8, even 10 inches long. This is taken in January. So a really attractive thing, I think. The tassels here. Garrya, Road Warrior. A couple of the other things here, continuing on with kind of the dry Western things. The Rhamnus, now called Frangula, that will not be on the quiz. But these are Western buckthorns, I think is the one of the common name, or coffee berries. They're really variable from columnar to low mounds to bright green to silvers. And this is one called Rhamnus or Frangula tomentella, native of the Siskiyous and South. One of the things I really love about it is the fact that it is evergreen, but it has these red stems and silver leaves. These colors or this combination really does kind of warm it up in the winter and cool it down in the summer. Another close relative is Rhamnus tomentella. We call this one hayfork. Comes from one very specific spot in the Siskiyous. Again, evergreen, and the texture of these leaves is just like velour pajamas. It really is an amazing thing. So beautiful to look at, and part of that sort of tactile component of the garden that we often don't think about. The fruit, I think, is really beautiful. It starts out sort of a pink, goes red, and then eventually black. It is called coffee berry, but it's also a purgative. So I would, if you try and making a drink out of it, just do it at home. Another great Western plant. This is Baccharis or coyote bush. It's native from about Astoria, a couple of patches on Sauvie Island, a few patches in the Willamette Valley, mostly coastal again, all the way to Baja. If you're driving along right now, I just was on the coast yesterday, and the female plants are covered with this these seed pods, and they're just really making a pretty sight. We tend to select the types that are male, so they don't seed, but mostly they're evergreen shrubs or ground covers. They flower off and on all winter, and all summer. So you've always got something happening. But in the winter, it's particularly nice because they are magnets for all kinds of winter euglossine bees and all kinds of things. And sometimes the European honeybees can be a little bit of a thug. So it's nice to know we have something when they're groggy that really is good to our own bees. So think of coyote bush or Bacchus pilularis as good low hedging or even ground cover. Kind of a nice carex, these grassy things. This is Carex barbary, and it's called the Santa Barbara sedge, although it's native from Southern California, also to Northern Oregon along the coast. It is evergreen, gets maybe 3 feet tall, like a kind of a skinny leaf blue phormium, maybe something like that. We've been using these a lot in the last couple of years just because they're such a good sort of all around, all year presence. They have sort of, I would say, fairly nondescript, though pretty flowers, I guess, for a carex. But the fact that they're evergreen, I think, is a really nice thing. They can also be dry or wet. The Muhlenbeckias, or Muhlenbergias, sorry, the deer grasses, what great plants. A couple of them are native to Oregon, others are in the west and the southwest. This happens to be a planting at UC Davis, but these inflorescences don't come out until about July, maybe even August, and they're still going strong now. But it's all about texture, and that's a Zauschneria or a California fuchsia growing in it. And the fuchsia, the California fuchsia is Zauschneria or Epilobium canem. So it's one of the ones with tall, skinny flower spikes. So think of these Muhlenbergias. They're really great. Same with some of the West Coast iris. I think a lot of you have probably grown the Pacific Coast iris, both the cultivars and the species, but fewer and fewer species I've seen around late, and I've really fallen back in love with them. This is one from Southern Oregon, mostly in the Chetco River drainage, called Iris thompsoni. So it gets maybe, I don't know, 18 inches by 18 inches. The nice thing about these creatures is that they are totally evergreen. So for most of the year, they look like nice patches of, say, green mondo grass or something like that. And then for a few weeks in spring, they do this, and it really is a pleasure. And I like to say the Pacific Coast iris flower for about 10 minutes, but actually, these go for about 3 weeks, something like that. Well worth doing. Iris anominata, another of my favorite species, kind of a light cream to golden leaf, or a flower, sorry, and some of the great color forms. Many of the oranges that you see in Pacific Coast iris have come from these originally. The leaves are a little bit smaller than Iris thompsoni, maybe 6 or 8 inches, something like that. So a really nice, tight clump. And the nice thing is they make a really good sort of low scale ground cover around the knees of some of your garden shrubs, like manzanitas and things like that. Here growing out of a very miniature ceanothus. I love broadleaf evergreens, and these are a bunch of our native ones. Here we've got a Notholithocarpus densa floris variety echinoidea. So that will definitely be on the quiz. Another Garrya here. It's Garrya buxifolia. Small species. We've got about 5 on the West Coast. The nice thing about this one is that the leaves are held upright. And so you see that reflective leaf underside, which I really like. And then one of a million manzanitas there at the bottom. Show you a few manzanitas here just because I spent most of the day doing cuttings of them from a recent collecting trip. So they're definitely on the mind. But talk about great West Coast plants. This is one that we call blue tip. The species is Arctostaphylos manzanita. Here, in this case, the species named after the common name of the whole genus, which is annoying, but that's the way it is. This blue tip gets to about 12 feet tall. And one of the things I've noticed is that if I can say that to somebody in our uh, sales area in the nursery, and they'll look at me like I'm crazy. I don't have room for a 12-foot shrub. But if I say it's a 10 or 12-foot miniature tree, people think of it very differently. And these are beautiful miniature trees. Think of them as a miniature madrone. this creature with this orange bark and blue leaves. We named this one Blue Tip. Beautiful mountain area where we collected it, looked over the edge, and somebody dumped a bunch of garbage down the hill like happened. So tip like the dump, but it's also just this beautiful blue leaf. So this is one that's been really fun to grow. Another really pleasing plant. This is a big manzanita. This is Arctostaphylos glauca, native to Central California, mostly into Southern California. The mom of this thing was over 30 feet tall. Granted, it didn't get there very quickly, but beautiful blue leaves, white flowers, just barely blushed pink, usually winter. And there is one of the trees. She was about 34 feet tall, I think. That's the biggest manzanita I've ever seen. So it'll take a while to get there, but I do have one in the garden that's about 15 feet now. So if you're looking for a plant in your dry garden, that's just going to slowly become this beautiful blue thing, worth a try. My friend Judy here, when we were working on a project down south, falling in love with this. Another one here, you can just see the close-ups of the flowers. Sometimes they're prettier just when they're in bud than in flower. But you see those great red stems and blue leaves. This is a trial area at the North Willamette Experimental Station in Aurora. Neil Bell, among others, put this together. So there are about, I don't know, 50 or 60 manzanitas here growing all at once. Really great to compare and contrast. You can see here with some of these colors, not even really in flower, how great these are for our part of the world. One here, this is one called Ghostly. It's been around a little bit, but luckily more than it has been. This is at Argyle Winery in Dundee when it was a fairly new planting. But I really like this color, again, especially at this time of the year. Pajaroensis here, native to just one small area on the Central California coast. The flowers are pink, December, January, February, which are great, but I really love this new growth. Few of the native goodies down in the Siskiyous. This is a color palette that I really love to use, and I've been doing it more and more in my own garden. We've got Arctocephalus canescens here in the foreground, Vaccinium deliciosum. So one of the huckleberries that is a low grower and the fruit might be delicious, but it's really tiny. And then among other things, that's Western azalea there in the dead center, having that really nice dark fall foliage. This is in November, but really a nice matrix, and here not even a flower in sight. A couple more Arctostaphylos manzanita again in flower in December. That, just trying to get it to advance. Just doing here, sorry about that. We'll keep. We're going to look at this thing for a second here until it decides to keep going. Now it wants to do markup. I will be right back. I'm going to get some technical assistance. Hold on, we're working on it. Oh, it's still working.
this over here? What's that? Put your thumb on that hole there. Oh, what's your password? Okay. There we go.
All right, we're gonna try this again. I'll call if I panic. Thanks. Some of the other things we like to use are the ceanothus. There are so many good ones. As you know, all of them are blue except the ones that aren't. There's some white ones, some other colors. But the nice is they come in a lot of sort of ground cover or low shrub forms, which is really nice. Here are a few we used at Argyle. So native shrubs. Another nice thing is like the rhamnus we looked at before our interlude, things in the rhamnus family fix nitrogen also really well, and I was going to mention that with those. So we try to use these in our dryland plantings with some frequency and repeated because they do add a little bit of fertilizer naturally to the soil, which is really good. This is a planting at Argyle, again, the winery. And another kind of fun texture, this is actually a plum. This is Prunus illicifolius, native of kind of Central California and Southern California, I think into Baja, but they can also be pruned into a large shrub or small tree. I just love these glossy leaves and evergreen, but the fruit here is, well, it tastes really good. Unfortunately, it's about 98% seed, but still a really nice shrub. We've been using it for some time. And I don't know if any of you have grown Catalina ironwood, another Western tree, can be kept as a small shrub or a large shrub. This is only on the islands off of Southern California, and we have been planting it here, mostly in protected sites, but there's a couple of mama trees around now that are 20 something years old where we do get our seed. And I love the texture. This is evergreen with this orange shreddy bark. Also, some of the ribes, if you keep up, what do they say? Keeping up with current events. This is Ribes malvaceum. It's one called dancing tassels. Siskiyous and south, it's like our own red currant, except the flowers start coming out generally in November when it leaves out, and then they go all winter long. So it's nice to have this in the garden. I'm not a huge pink fan, I'm just not, but this definitely is major points. Another currant that doesn't look like a currant. This is Ribes speciosum, the fuchsia flowered currant. So it starts leafing out with the very first rains. It's been about a month now, and these flowers do look like fuchsias. They're bright orange red. Depending on the year, they'll start now and go all the way through April, May. Sometimes they don't start until about the end of February. But as you can imagine, the hummingbirds love these, and I just really like this texture. So Ribes speciosum. Monkey flowers, some really good ones. Um, this is Diplicus, and there are several around the West Coast. This is one that you'll find growing on the coast from about Bandon south and also in the South Cascades and Sierra Nevada, kind of a shrub. And this is Mimulus or Diplicus grandiflorus. Those flowers are about 3/4 of an inch across, and they'll go from late winter or early spring through all the way until fall. You want to water them carefully in the summer so they don't get too much, but they're really rewarding. Just give them a kind of a lean spot. And also textures. I like yuccas, agaves, other things that form rosettes. Not showing many of these, but it I think behooves any gardener to have a few of these things that are again focal points from the distance. They really do well for us. I'd like to give them a little bit of summer water. I think one of the misnomers about something that the Denver Botanical Garden years ago started labeling the xeriscape garden. I think we need to water this stuff a bit here in the summer because they all come from places that get some in order for these things to put on growth and just look at their best. So in my own front garden, this is more what I call the xeriscape garden. It's a combination of Western stuff, the manzanitas and ceanothus and rhamnus and all those things, but I've mixed in cyclamen, which I really love for this time of the year. Those are phlomis, the Jerusalem sages there, and there's a lavender right in the middle called silver anouk, which is my favorite. It doesn't really need shearing. It kind of behaves more like a normal shrub. So definitely worth doing. But this is kind of a look I like. Doesn't go away in the winter, but things come and go through it. And a little valuable component about some of these things, like some of the sages and this phlomis, this is Phlomis aurea, they have a quality of leaves that are called allelopathic. I don't know if you have worked with that term, but if you can use it in a sentence a few times tonight. But there are some chemicals in the leaves that tend to prohibit seed germination under the plants. So, as you know, a lot of things like sages and rosemaries and other things, we think they taste good, but they're actually trying to ward off their enemies, bugs, and competition. So, if you leave the sclerophyll or the dried leaves under these, one, they make a good mulch, but also you tend to get a lot less weed germination. And here on Sauvie Island, I can say that we have every barn weed there has ever been known. So I'll use any help I can get. The other thing, these are evergreen. And so for me, using plants that either leaf out or are evergreen all winter also prohibit many of the weeds. And a lot of them are Mediterranean. As you know, they come up in the fall and then bug us all winter long. And speaking of that, cyclamen, what wonderful plants. I think a lot of you who've gardened for a while have these around. This is Cyclamen hydrofolium. So there's sort of a number of species, but there are a couple I really like. This is the first one to come out in August and September. The flowers will come out often before the leaves do, and then come the leaves. And we've tended to kind of group our different leaf forms together so we can get seed from them. But what a pleasure to look at these at this time of the year. So Cyclamen hydrofolium will flower till about the end of October, something like that. Little bit of a lapse, and then Cyclamen coum comes out, and it flowers often into April. So great plants for winter texture. This is Cyclamen coum. We're just calling it the Christmas tree form. Great winter plants. So you just see some of the textures here, worth having. And then the flower, this is about the end of November or so. And it's really nice to have these coming up through ground covers of things like ceanothus or manzanitas, that kind of thing, because the leaves will look good all winter, then they disappear, and the same with the flowers, and you still have green around them. This is an all silver cyclamen coum. We have these now planted a lot with our Pacific Coast iris. So some great textures here. This is in the old garden, this is a bunch of New Zealand textures. Silvers divaricating these zigzaggy branches. And a lot of the colors from there are the moas could not see sort of this liver color. So if you've got little tiny leaves and you're liver colored, chances are you're not going to get pecked at. So defense of the plants, but it's something we really like. And there's something about just jumping to a few New Zealand plants now. They take a little more water in the summer, but definitely worth it. Here's Pseudowintera, some, you'll see the tops here in a minute, some Pseudopanax. There's the Pseudopanax there, just with these wonderful textures. Again, no real flowers visible, but some really good stuff. This is Pseudopanax crassifolius. It's fun. It's an Aurelia relative, but it's not until it gets 10 or 15 feet tall that the leaves will turn sort of more maple-like when it's out of bird reach of the now extinct, or beak reach of the now extinct moa. But again, it's a defense mechanism, but we like it for our sculptural purposes. Again, this is just a hybrid that we've grown. I think it's a really fun texture. And another hybrid. Some of these are a little more tender than the crassifolius, so worth throwing a blanket or something over, growing in a pot and bringing it inside should it get really cold. After last January, I think some of us were burned a little bit on some of these. But some of these are absolutely fabulous landscape plants. This is the best dressed Toyota dealership in New Zealand. Took this picture a few years ago. Again, pseudopanics. And why not grow some of these other things? These are tree ferns with Fuchsia excorticata. This is on just off the south tip, actually, of southern New Zealand. But that thing there is a fuchsia that gets a trunk about a foot across. What will happen here if we get a year like last January, it'll freeze to the ground and have to regrow. So we might not get 18 inches out of the deal, but boy, that bark is beautiful. And Cyathea australis here, one of the hardier tree ferns. That's definitely worth a try. I don't know if any of you have grown O'Harias. They're in the saxifrage family. Shrubs and trees. This one is O'Haria sextillosa. It's, I don't know, 15 or 18 feet tall, but is super narrow, evergreen, and there aren't that many things that come into full flower in, say, August, and this one does. So lightly scented, but really sweet, and a good sort of, I think it's a really good late summer color, the white and the green. So think of some of the O'Harias to try. Do the other southern hemisphere things. Astelia nervosa here in the front. Sort of a lily slash agave family creature. This is a cultivar called Red Gem. This is a garden we did at the coast a few years ago with various carex and things like that. There it is, sort of just off to the left, growing as a container plant. Pretty easy thing to do with a form of Yucca recurvifolia to the right. Looking at the translation here of my voice, it's actually spelling has gotten really good anymore, especially with these botanical names. Anyway, just here in a container planting. Should be pretty evergreen. And it is just really nice to think of where we are in the world. When we were doing the Chinese garden years ago, doing the curation of it, the lead designer said when they had to put many windows on the outside of the block, that every window is a portrait. And it's very true. And I just keep thinking for our sort of more urban purposes, it can be some beautiful plant that's a focal point at any time of the year. Again, maybe while you're doing the dishes, or it can be your neighbor's boat with a blue tarp on it. So your choice. But boy, if you plant a plant in front of something like that, it's a much better scene. And also just looking at the surroundings. This is the garden of Jo Wakelin on the South Island of New Zealand. And she has looked at her surroundings and brought those colors right into the garden. It's really a wonderful place. A little bit of that here. This is back at Argyle Winery. This is Kianacloa rubra. It's a really pretty kind of brick colored grass from New Zealand, and it really goes well just about anywhere. This also wants a little summer water. It's not too thirsty, but it wants some. But that orange color gets even better in the winter. And Kianacloa. And here it is growing with various manzanitas, of course, in the background, and Yucca rostrata, or the beaked yucca. It will never be without that plant. Again, flowers once in a while, but those blue leaves and the way they're held, they're always moving a little bit in the breeze, and they're not that prickly. Libertia, another New Zealander, lily family, pretty closely related to iris, and this is Libertia peregrinans. It makes a little spreading ground cover, about a foot tall, and especially in the winter, it's this beautiful orangey color. In spring and summer, it has wands of white flowers that give way to bluish berries. So definitely worth having. Again, in my no bare earth strategy for my own garden. This is really a nice thing to fill in between other plants. We use it with a little acana called purpurea, or one of the pittosporums, like County Park Dwarf or one of those, because you get these good deep purples, then with this orange, again, without even trying. So Azara is a couple of trees here. Most have been planting, showing smaller things. Azara microphylla. I think a lot of you have probably grown it in the garden, and a small tree, maybe 15 to 25 feet. But variegata, the variegated form, is still less common in gardens, and it's one that I've really enjoyed because it's planted as a background. The leaves are only about half an inch and come in these sort of sprays, and then February or so, these little tiny flowers come and they smell like chocolate. So a nice thing to kind of have wafting through the garden. Azara. Another Azara, this one is a little less common, Azara dentata, and it's one we dubbed years ago 11th Avenue. It was a particularly successful plant in my old garden. This is for February, March, and these pompons smell like albizia, just this really sweet, wonderful fragrance that wafts for quite some distance. So Azara dentata can be used as a large shrub or screen, but also really nice, pruned into a small tree. Close up of the flowers here. Eucryphias, sort of on the summer tree kick. This is a genus of trees that's mostly in Chile and Australia, so some Gondwanan flora there. This one is ex rostrivore, so only maybe 15, eventually 20 feet tall, 6 or 8 feet wide, something like that. But glossy green, evergreen leaves, but these great white flowers in, again, mid to late summer. So super refreshing. Another Southern Hemisphere thing. This is from Chile. Fascicularia. This is Fascicularia pitcairnifolia. So it's a bromeliad, but one of the hardier ones. So we grow this in the shade under other shrubs where it looks like it would need more sun, but it doesn't really seem to. But you find it in Chile growing on rocks and trunks of trees, and just a really pretty evergreen rosette former. And when it's about to flower, the leaves turn bright green, or excuse me, bright red, and then they have these weird kind of celadon flowers in the middle. So a lovely plant. Some people, especially say Eastern Multnomah County, had these burned this last winter. So worth planting it in a sheltered spot. And I don't know, I always have plenty of burlap and remay around for things like this anyway. And if you're brave, plant it up on something like a wall. So fascicularia. A couple of the other sort of rosette forming perennials. I don't know how many of you are growing eryngiums at the moment. You're probably used to seeing the sort of metallic blue ones that are beautiful in and of themselves, but there are a bunch of others. So this is one from Argentina called Eryngium pandanifolium, like the pandanus. So that rosette in the background there is maybe 4 feet by 4 feet, something like that. Evergreen bluish leaves. So definitely gives New Zealand flax a run for its money. They are quite hardy. And then in late spring come these 6 foot clusters of flowers. You can kind of see the carrot family in them. And they'll be colorful right through the early to maybe mid-fall when they go kind of golden. I tend to leave them up for the winter, but that's, as they say, salt to taste. Um, really pretty thing. So think of some of the other eryngiums that are just not around very much, but should be. Got to throw a couple of other trees in. People are often asking about eucalyptus, and one of the issues, I don't know, some plants have a little bit of baggage, and these, there are almost 500 species of eucalyptus out there. A lot of them are sold, for instance, in herb stores, that kind of thing. So people go home with their little 4 inch tall eucalyptus in a pot and it grows to 30 feet, and then we get a cold year and turns to, well, free firewood, I guess. So really good to stick to some of those that we know are tough. This is one called Eucalyptus perenniana, Perrin, sometimes called the spinning gum. But some of these are absolutely tough as nails. We've never had any damage on ours. Medium-sized tree, maybe 30 to 45 feet. The smell is terrific. Well, smells like eucalyptus, and the bark is kind of orange and shredding. So for sort of a medium garden tree with some insurance that at least the weather isn't going to bother it, really good one to have. Another, sticking the last couple of slides here are Australians. I don't know how many of you are growing grevilleas at the moment, but there are at least a dozen we can do really well with. This is an absolute favorite, and it is, to me, still really underused in our local gardens. This is Grevillea victoriae and a cultivar named Murray Valley Queen. It gets fairly big. Ours is about 8 feet at the moment, sort of a pyramidal. I'm keeping it a sort of a gumdrop shape. Pretty silver green leaves, kind of white on the underside. But the nicest thing about this plant is it really comes into flower well, by mid-October and will go all winter long. And I can tell you, last January, as you know, we had a little bit of a test as far as the weather goes, and we had 17 degrees out on Savi Island. This didn't skip a beat. They kept flowering right on through it. So it might not be as happy if it's in a really fierce wind, but other than that, it's one of the toughest members of the Protea family, and it will make your hummingbirds happy all winter long. So Grevillea victoriae. Another couple of things in the Protea family. This is a Banksia. A lot of species in Australia, not very many of them, unfortunately, hardy, but what a wonderful plant. This is Banksia marginata. It's native of the tablelands of Tasmania, up high, 4,000 feet. So it gets a lot of cold. Ours was not damaged at all. It's about, I don't know, almost 8 or 9 feet tall, not damaged this last winter. The undersides of those leaves are also silver. So nice contrast with a little bit of wind. Also, you get that flashing of silver and green. And this really cool flower has an interesting fragrance. I guess you'd call it a fragrance. It smells to me like baking bread. I don't know what pollinates it, but actually we do know what pollinates it, but it's not bakers, it's just birds, but definitely worth having. So some of these hardy Banksias. Same kind of shape. There's a bit of a theme here. Some of the bottle brushes are really fantastic plants. We still get a number in from the big box stores, but there's one that's been a pet peeve of mine. Oh, Little John is one. It's been called Zone 7 for 30 years. It's definitely Zone 9B and a half. Anything under about 28 will nuke it. So look at some of your neighbors, what they're growing, do some Googling. But this is one called Callistemon pallidus and Best Blue. We named this a number of years ago. The leaves are a little bit bluer than shows in this picture, but really heavy bloomer, lightly fragrant, but a really good texture. So look at some of the hardy callistemons. So we showed a tree fern a little bit ago. Um, there are a bunch around, and people do grow them, of course. We cover the crowns in the wintertime just in case if you're away from the coast. But Cyathea australis is a little bit of a tougher one. We saw this growing in Australia at super high elevations where it gets really cold. Well, at least down to 10 degrees Fahrenheit, something like that. So some of these are definitely worth playing with. They're slowly becoming more available on the market, and what a good texture. So Cyathea australis. And this might be old hat to some people here, but I still love the honeybush or Melianthus. They're from South Africa. You've got these beautiful sort of blue tinted burgundy leaves. There are a couple of cultivars around too. And on second year plants, you get these great sort of orangey red inflorescences, and they drip kind of a weird kind of red honey looking stuff. And if you happen to have sunbirds in your garden, they'll be all over it, but hummers kind of like them too. So if you haven't grown Melianthus, this is Melianthus major here, do it. We lost most of our stems to the ground last winter, but they popped up and flowered a little bit this year. So they're definitely perennials and shrubs if we ever actually have a mild winter again. Euphorbia. Happiness is definitely a sense of euphorbia. As you know, it's a huge genus, but there are a bunch native of sort of the Canary Islands, Madeira, that area. And this is Euphorbia stygiana. It's a shrub. Actually, it can get 8 or 9 feet in height. Really, I just love this texture. But it's evergreen. The flowers are kind of a light yellow. So I don't grow it for the flowers, just these leaves. Most years it's evergreen and makes a large shrub. A couple of years out of the last maybe 15 or 20, it's just frozen to the ground and comes up like a perennial. So if you're worried about having a cold spell, can't hurt to mulch it a little bit at the base. But for a really striking plant, Euphorbia stygiana. And how about acanthus? You've seen bear's breeches around plenty, I'm sure. This is one from Ethiopia. Acanthus senii, Senii. Making the rounds, this was sent to me by a friend that was seed collecting in Tanzania and doing some work there. But it's a shrub that gets 3 or 4 feet in height. Mid to late summer, it'll have these bright red flowers with silver green leaves. It's really a striking plant. And they'll go through the fall. They're still in flower now, but I think if we get another night that hits 30 degrees, they'll probably go away for the year. Some years they're completely upright and kind of shrubby. Some years they'll freeze to the ground and then come back from the base. So pretty reliable. You're not going to lose it, even though some years it would be a perennial. So Acanthus senii, really interesting plant. Definitely your neighbors won't have it. I'm really into bulbs. I don't have a lot of patience for them. I wish I did, but some are better with my psyche than others. Um, the Amaryllis belladonna types are great things because they just come up no matter what. These are Nurinis. They're also South African, and this is one called Wayne's Silver. So it leaves go deciduous sort of midwinter, then come up again mid-spring. It's from the eastern parts of South Africa. But the flowers here start as early as the end of August to mid-September, and they're still going right now. We had frost the last 2 nights, so they're not looking as good as they were, but not bad. And there are a whole bunch of colors and hybrids of these that are worth playing with. Some are more tender, and you can keep them in pots and put them in a plunge or bring them in should it get super cold. But think of some of the hardier Narinis. So that was just a sample splatter, things that have been really capturing my attention this last year. There could have been 4 or 5 more things since I have a really short attention span. But I hope at least some of those piqued your interest because there's something out there for everybody. And with that, if there are any questions, like, could you spell all those things or anything like that, just let me know.
All right. I could not spell most of those things,
Sorry about that.
and I'm taking notes as quickly as I can. But I think you made mention that if we go to the Cistus website, that there's information about all of these plants. Would that be
Yeah,
the
the nice
case?
thing is, oh, sorry. But if
Continue.
you just spell the first, few letters of it, then the plants will pop up and hopefully infill the right thing. But there's pretty detailed information. We try to do a nice little paragraph on each plant.
Okay, that will definitely help. I will be going there tomorrow to
All right.
start checking these plants off. You mentioned several times, you mentioned names that it sounded as if you named these things. So are you developing cultivars of these
Yes.
plants?
The question is, are we developing cultivars? We maybe make 200 to 300 new introductions a year through Cistus, and some of these are from our breeding programs or our wild collections from anywhere from South Africa to Australia to New Zealand. we've been doing a lot of playing around with things like our manzanitas because one, they're close. So we're going out and selecting for flower color, for leaf color, for size of plant, for plants that are growing in, say, a more difficult situation that are going to be better in our own backyards. And maybe more important for things like manzanitas, they get the same thing that our madrones get, that black spot. We just call it
Mhm.
cooties. So we're always looking for plants that are a lot more cootie free. And then, of course, we bring things back. We see if they work from cuttings. How do they perform in the garden? Sometimes it's a multi-year process, but it brings a lot of new paints to our palette, which is really nice.
Oh, yeah. Now, is Cistus open to the public or is
Yeah,
it a wholesale?
no, it has retail and mail order. We have some larger groups of plants also that we use for our own design work, but others can as well. But it's open every day from 10 to 5 on Sabi.
Okay. And and some of these pictures obviously were from, it sounded like your backyard rather than from the nursery. But
Right.
are there big plants that so that we could see the growth pattern and stuff like that, or are they all little guys in pots?
Yeah, well, actually, the nursery itself has the sales area that has things anywhere from 4-inch pots up to 15 and 20-gallon size. We do a lot of native and climate adapted, say, evergreen oaks and things, and a lot of those are bigger. And then we have our mail order greenhouses that have several thousand things in them, and most of those are pint size that we can stick in the mail or people can order to pick up. But people are welcome to look at the garden here, which is it's about 5 acres, something like that.
Oh,
And
okay.
we're always happy to organize tours and things like that. Or if you're coming, just let me know and you're welcome to wander around.
All right. So those are all of my questions, and now I'm moving on to everybody else's.
All right.
Um, could you single out a few of the plants you presented as being especially loved by pollinators?
Yeah, for sure. The pollinator plants, I think, they're particularly interesting. Um, for the biggest pollinators, I'd say things like I showed a couple of Zauschnerias. Now they're called Epilobium canem or the California fuchsias. There are a bunch of cultivars out there. They tend to have beautiful orange trumpet flowers. Those they can vary to pink and salmon, but they don't come out until July, and then they go all through the fall. So when other things are sort of hunkered down and waiting out summer, they're just doing their thing. So those are wonderful plants, and the hummingbirds absolutely go for them. So that's pretty exciting. It's kind of the same with a lot of the Mahonias, both the native ones and the Asian ones. Our native ones tend to flower from like mid to late winter through early spring. The Asian ones tend to go from late summer through midwinter. So if you do both, I've divided my garden into very little summer water and more summer water. And so you can have it all. And even though most of them are sort of peach to yellow flowered, those Mahonias are really also loved by hummingbirds. I had mentioned the Baccharis, the coyote bush. It's probably my favorite for pollinators because every little bee you've never not seen is on them, and they tend to flower sporadically throughout the year. So again, you're going to have good flowering on them in January and February, and it's nice to give our native pollinators a little leg up at that time of the year.
Absolutely.
So the Rhamnus and the Ceanothus are also really, really good. Um, Everybody visits them. So those are some of the best.
Okay. Next question. Could you spell that hardy tree fern?
Ah, Cyathia, and then Australis.
Thank you.
You are welcome.
The allopathic plant. The question is, did you say I should put it near a wicked weed to dissuade the weed?
Yeah, you could make a little poetry out of that. Um, it won't necessarily do anything if the weed's already there, but we found, and for instance, in the south of France, they're using these plants a lot, where in many places, of course, the use of herbicides has been outlawed. Um, so if you let things like, rosemary's one of them, the phlomis, a lot of our sages, that kind of thing. If you let that little duff fall, and I'm sure um, Master Gardener lessons would have you leave all that stuff as mulch, then of course that just in and of itself does inhibit a lot of weeds from coming up. But the chemicals in them will also prohibit a lot of the seeds from germinating. And so in our own garden, we've got things like these ground cover manzanitas and ceanothus and other things, and then the cyclamen and bulbs and crocus and stuff come up through them. So it doesn't inhibit those, but it really has reduced the amount of weeds coming up in the fall.
Interesting. Okay, now here person has a question. Do you have any suggestions for an evergreen for a mostly shaded area that's under 6 to 8 feet tall and likes wet?
Ah, yes, I would move for one thing. But if you can't do that, yeah, the wet thing is this, if especially if it's I would
Wet
assume
in
it's
the winter, not in the
wet in the
middle of the
winter.
summer.
Okay, yeah,
Yes.
yeah. One of the best ones is Myrica California, the Californica, the wax myrtle. It's kind of an old-fashioned thing, but it's not used that much, and it's a really good evergreen plant. It'll eventually get a little bit bigger than that, but it's really easily pruned. If it's not too wet, some of the Garrya, again, like Coast Silk Tassel, is surprisingly good in at least winter wet shade. And what else? I'm trying to think of. Those are among the best, really.
Okay. Um, how do you determine that a new introduction from a plant that you've collected abroad isn't going to become invasive for us?
Right. No, that's a very good question, and that's
Yeah.
something that has always been sort of near and dear to me. We have a whole series of things we look at when we're looking at a plant in the wild, for instance. And for instance, um, do any of its relatives tend to become weeds anywhere around the world in like climates? Is it growing in a disturbed spot? So does it look like it's maybe a little too happy? And for us, we're looking for plants that are adapted to summer drought, but not that happy. So we tend not to even collect from groups of plants that have invasive relatives. And then we do a lot of testing just to make sure they don't reseed and that kind of thing. So that's probably our most vigorous protocol to make sure. And as far as I know, nothing we've ever introduced has become at all weedy. There's almost an exception that I have to admit. There's a tree we were growing from Mexico, an oak, and from where it comes, it should not be invasive. It gets a lot of summer rain there, and the nice thing about things like some of the Mexican oaks is that once they're established, they are drought tolerant, but their seedlings won't survive over a summer, which is a
Mm.
good thing for us. Well, guess what? It started seeding into neighbors and other places that was completely unirrigated. So that's a plant where, we've taken out of our system, and I don't think it's going to make great forests here, but it had some characteristics that didn't make us happy.
Yeah. All right. Um, were there any problems with manzanitas given the severe cold we had last winter?
A good question about cold and manzanitas. Um, there is one called insularis, which comes from Catalina Island, that is one of the first to come into flower, usually October, November. And its little flowers were singed, not killed, but singed, and some of the new growth was. And I've heard a few people had a branch here and there of random manzanitas die off, but for the most part, they are tough campers. So I would say, if you live especially like in the gorge, or I don't think there's much of Washington County in the gorge, but
No.
still, um, if you live in a place that's, prone to a little bit more cold, good to read up a little bit and see where the plant comes from. But for the most part, they're good.
Okay. And a second question about your proprietary, well, I don't know if they're proprietary plants, but the ones that you have developed. Do
Yeah.
you patent them?
The patenting question is interesting also. The nursery and what I do is sort of mission based a lot more than anything else. Um, we, until this year, had never patented a plant because I've always thought plants should be plants for the people. Um, And there's also technically, if I collect, for instance, this last weekend, we did a recollection of a beautiful golden variegated native ceanothus. And probably it's pretty enough to be patentable, but it's from the wild and you can't patent anything from the wild.
Mm,
So we
sure.
don't do that. And we don't have a habit of patenting stuff because it just ties it up. We have an ivy and a couple of other things that are now, but for the most part, no.
Okay, and two people have asked if there was any way to get a list of the plants that we saw today. The problem with that is after the recording stops, I don't have a way to get it out to these people.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. I did not do a slide list with this, unfortunately, but if anybody has any questions individually about these plants, I'm happy to, to get back in contact with them.
And then just, I think first going to the website
Yeah,
and starting there, I think is the way to go.
there are a lot of wormholes to go down with that website and everything else. So
I bet.
you can learn a lot about things you never wanted to and all of that. But there might be some stumpers, and if so, don't hesitate to contact us.
Well, Sean, this was a wonderful presentation and I've got all sorts of ideas. So I want to thank you very much. And we are now, the Master Gardeners are going to continue on with our chapter meeting, and the rest of you can continue on with your evening. Thanks very much.
A pleasure.
Okay, so. Okay, so there we go. Okay, so I want to share screen.